So first off, thank you everyone for joining. So an important topic that we have for Audit Tuesday today, data breaches and what to message and what to execute after the breach. So to explore and expand on the topic, we're honored to have DV Dranam Raju, CEO and founder of Essert.io, and Peter Gailey, CEO of Gailey Solutions, and our own certified ethical hacker, UATest CEO, Garret Grajek. Hi, everyone.
Hi,
Hello.
guys.
Hello, Ashley.
Okay, so much to cover. So where should we start? So how about we start with you, Peter? So what is usually involved in a data breach?
Oh, uh, lots to talk about data breaches. Data breaches are very high level. It's a misuse of data. It's either abuse or could be on purpose. It could be inadvertent. It's just data being used in a form or a format that it's not generally supposed to be used for. We've all heard about malware, which is somebody injecting some bad code into your systems, ransomware, where they exploit that and bounty you and charge you for fixing it, kind of stuff. 0-day is a an embedded set of code that's going to trigger at some time in the future. Certainly, we know about phishing, which is spear phishing, which is somebody sending links or emails or something that's just got some malicious intent in it. So these are all different vehicles for data breaches. Again, it could be an innocent party doing something with data that they're not supposed to. Different kinds of data breaches are going to be, personal identifiable information, healthcare information, government classified information. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. One of the key issues that we're going to speak about today about data breaches is the principle of least privilege. I think Garrett's going to speak about that. And then identity and access management. So there's a whole bunch of techniques that we can deploy pre-breach, post-breach, but kind of the high-level picture is a data breach is just data being used for things that it shouldn't be used for, if that makes sense.
And DV, before we get into the regulations, what are some of the best practices around messaging to the outside world and timing by enterprises once they realize that they actually have a breach?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, right? So this is kind of similar to, a crisis management. It's like most enterprises have a playbook for it. And the best practice would be to update that playbook, right? And many SOC teams have new playbooks, their own playbooks on how they do it. So what should this playbook contain? Typically I would focus on three big areas. What is your process and methodology for your internal assessment? It's kind of like this is a parallel to the remediation team. And it should be done once you are aware of the incident, right? That's typical what people do with respect to breaches or any major incidents. So the next one is, as part of that playbook, would be to develop a communication plan. The focus of that plan has to be clarity and, some level of honesty, so a little bit of transparency in there. The thing to avoid, though, here is the technical jargon. Why? Because, you can start confusing people as to exactly what might have happened and what didn't happen and all of that stuff. And now this needs to be done balancing the needs of all your stakeholders, like mostly employees, customers, and investors. Others like vendors, etc., come into play also. But the transparency should be evident with these three main stakeholders, because saying too much while your remediation is going on, okay, is not very helpful to your cyber teams itself. So hold back kind of on the technical elements of it and more as to the impact aspects of it. And the last piece is timing. That is very critical. You got to balance between being prompt and being accurate. It is also a major consideration. Obviously, we'll talk about regulations. It also, timing is a major considerations on the regulation aspect of it. Of course, other areas, like revisions and changes and modifications of your security practices, all of that come into play. But the three pieces are assessments, communication, timing. Those are the three main elements I would focus on.
So, DB, there are regulations now on what needs to be messaged after companies are breached. So, what are those regulations?
So, on a very broad scale, at ESERT, we think of 180 countries and their reporting requirements, but let's narrow it down to the US market for now. So, if you really look at the US market, you have 50 state jurisdictions. Each have a different regulation for data breach notifications. On top of that, you have these federal regulations. Now let's narrow it further, right? For the data breach notification, as I was saying, there are laws across all the 50 states. Each state has a different threshold, different exceptions. Majority of the states have this encryption exception. Now, in addition, recently, 12 new privacy laws are in place, similar to, the California CPRA and its predecessor, CCPA. Most of those laws are either, drafted against the CPRA or the GDPR. So it's some combination thereof, right? And so each of those laws have notifications with respect to privacy breaches. So you need to differentiate between a breach and a privacy breach, and who you need to report to, how you need to report about that and stuff like that. And on top of that, we have this new SEC cyber rules, right? That went into effect in the Gazette, I think about July 26th of this year, and they're effective December. And the CERSA regulations are still in draft. Okay, so that's a new thing that's coming. And for the finance industry, there is this new NYDFS regulations. Okay, and obviously the SEC is also considering some similar cyber rules for financial entities, which is separate from public companies. So that also comes into play. Now, the main thing here is the reporting requirements depending on the time frame. Some give you 3 days, some give you 4 days, some give you 7 days, some 30 days. It kind of varies all over the place. Now, to really consider it is very simple, right? What's the least common denominator for you? Because some of these reporting is made public nearly immediately. The SEC is a public disclosure, right? So all the investors would know about it. And that is obviously matters to the public companies. This implies that you need to manage the media messages prior to that reporting as well. So your investor relationships guys need to get involved with you. And that's a real big problem. The other problem is there could be leaks just before the disclosure itself, like intentional or unintentional leaks. And this becomes an issue to manage as well. It is primarily an issue for brand and reputation. It gives you a very broad scope, but kind of gives you the complexity of what some of the companies are dealing with right now.
So what industries are required to send out notices?
Well, nearly all industries are impacted across board. Obviously, let's go from the bottom up, right? Sole proprietors and small businesses need to be mainly concerned about their operations and customers than regulations, right? It's not such a major, regulations don't impact them as well as big. B2B companies, big impact, right? And companies, starting with 5 million, 10 million and above, privacy laws come into play for those companies. Now, obviously, public companies, the SEC and nearly all other privacy regulations take effect. And those are mandatory, obligations from the SEC as well as the privacy obligations there. Now, if you really look at it, we are talking about data breaches in this conversation. But as for the SEC cyber rules, it's not just data breaches. It's also about cyber incidents that impact the company. Okay, so the word I would use is incident of consequence. Okay, before you consider them to be, resulting in a material incident. So you need to really think about it, think about all of these things when it comes to industries and companies. Obviously, SARSA is specific to, infrastructure that impact. It's more a national security consideration coming into play. And when that regulation gets written and published, we will have more discussion about that.
And in your experience, what types of mistakes are companies doing in messaging after a breach?
So most companies have this BCDR process, like Peter was talking about, right? And there's a playbook, and they consider that, good enough, right? I've heard these words from CISOs and GRC executives use something like, "Oh, we are covered," right? In their mindset, they're absolutely correct, right? I'm not judging anybody saying, "Oh, we're good, we're covered," right? They are likely to have a good process for remediation, right? So that's a separate process, right? The second area where most companies need to mature, there's a question of where that maturity is. Most companies need to mature is the timing of assessments and timing of disclosures. That is missing element in here, right? So the tech guys, the CISOs and the security guys are basically saying, "Hey, we know what we are doing. It's very likely that is the case because cybersecurity has reached certain levels of maturity in terms of that, right? Especially when it comes to large incidents, right? So what I mean by, the areas of timing and assessments and disclosures is that most companies, the disclosure process is post remediation. So everything is done. We've recovered. Our business is back on. And now it's time to start to communicate. So this is kind of like post factor, after the incident has occurred. The third area of maturity is under identifying incidents of consequence. So, typically, you have categorization, right? Technically, if you look at incidents, you have like critical, major, et cetera, right? And the SOC team is only looking at certain type of incidents and ignoring the others because there's too many false positives and there's too many incidents and too little number of people addressing the incidents overall, right? So kind of this is a bit complex and obviously subjective, and there's no best practice to do this correctly so far. But assessing incidents of consequence for disclosures would be a very, very important process with the new SEC cyber rules, right? Getting the timing correct and the types of incidents that you need to assess, getting those things wrong could mean long-term implication like shareholder lawsuits and that kind of stuff. Kind of gives you a broad picture, right?
Let me jump in just for a second. It's one of the industry standard practices is a formalized incident response, business continuity, disaster recovery kind of a program. There's a technique that's used that's called the tabletop technique. That is, it's a test run. Hey, let's do a mock breach. And let's say, okay, here's what happened. Here are the symptoms of the breach. Let's stop the bleeding. Let's figure out, okay, there's a concept called RACI, which is who is responsible, who is accountable, who needs to be consulted, and who needs to be informed. The communication plan and an incident response disaster recovery scenario for a breach should have all of that laid out beforehand. In an ideal world, doing that on the fly is pretty hard to do, and you're probably going to get it wrong, right? Or nothing's perfect, as DV is saying, but it's a really good idea, and it's definitely a best practice to have an incident response plan in place. And part of that, to DV's point, is going to be a communication variable. Who communicates, right? And who's involved. I always say, and people get mad at me about this, but adult supervision is involved here. You really need. It's a really good idea to have somebody that has been through this kind of an exercise before.
Yeah, it's a PR. The team needs to be involved, right? So, absolutely. I think the technical team should get out of the way from that point of view and let the PR teams handle that. obviously, right? Because it's in my opinion, it's not the forte of a CISO or a CIO, right? So get the investor relations and get the marketing team and PR team involved.
Right. Well, each major function of an organization is going to have a part to play in that incident response plan. And certainly the PR people and the marketing people and some of the executives, you need to make the decision who's going to be the focal point person that's going to do the communication.
Right.
So, Peter, not all the hacks are against the big guys, right? SMB and commercial are under attack as well, wouldn't you say?
Right. Absolutely. Nobody's safe in the cybersecurity world at all, including individuals. Sometimes specifically individuals. Let me give you a little scenario. We've all heard, hopefully you've heard of the concept of a bot. What a bot is it's a digital robot. Okay. So picture some people with bad intent create some code, and they basically have mischief in mind, whether it's malware, ransomware, whatever, right? 0 day that we talk about. They create this robot and they let it loose on the internet. And it repeats itself, it self-clones itself, and it says, hey, go out and perform a function. And that function might be, hey, find a printer that's got an open port. Find a server that hasn't been patched. Find an open port into a network. Something, okay? And again, it's up to the how a person would construct a bot. Now, that's not to say that bots don't have their purposes for positive things as well. But from a negative perspective, a bot can be created, can be let loose to do things on the internet. And what it's going to do is if it finds that open port in a network, it's going to phone home. And it's going to basically say, hey, I found a vulnerability on this network. And then that bad group, the criminals are going to say, okay, we know we can get in by exploiting this. Now I'm going to have a strategy and a technique of what I'm going to do. Is it worth it? Is the company big enough? Is the payload, is the payoff big enough? Am I in it for financial purposes? Denial of service? There's all different kinds of ramifications of mischief. Am I just in it to create havoc? Right. So depending upon what the intent of that criminal is, it can happen to anybody. Ashley, to your point, it can happen to a 3-person company. Hey, I didn't configure my system right. Hey, I'm using Google documents, and somebody can get into my Google Enterprise, right? So again, the bad guys are going to the bot will phone home and say, okay, is it worth the exercise to do the exploit? They will have a very specific strategy on what they're doing and how they're trying to do it, and the bot is going to report back, here's what we found. So a bot may come back with 10,000 vulnerabilities in 10,000 companies, because it's automated, right? And the people doing the exploits, no, I just want to hit oil companies. No, I just want to hit a financial institution. No, I just want to hit a marketing, and again, it depends on what their strategy is. So size of target doesn't matter. The bots are the bots. I always use an analogy. If you ever saw The Matrix, one of the last scenes when they're attacking Zion is all of these robots that are penetrating, and the guy with the guns and all that stuff. That's what cybersecurity is all about. Is all of these bots? They don't care. They're just searching for vulnerabilities and soft spots. So to answer your question, it can happen to everybody, and does. I mean, people get their personal spaces violated all the time.
Targets of opportunity, and I like where you took that, Peter. is many people outside the Garret Peter DV world don't know how automated this stuff is.
Oh, it's totally automated.
Abstracted the hackers are from the targets. They don't care. They're using the same tools that we use to check our own vulnerabilities against ourselves. That's a whole other topic, right? And then they have the automation of tools like Metasploit that basically say, okay, what do you want me to do? You want me to scan all these IPs? Rock and roll. What vulnerability am I looking for? Okay. What do you want me to load when I find that vulnerability? And voila, they find a large company or they find a small company. Right?
One of the biggest breaches of all time was open source code in a printer. Right,
yeah, exactly.
That happened a couple of years ago, and millions of printers were compromised, and boom, that's an avenue into a network. The really scary thing to me, quite frankly, is, and Ashley, this kind of explains it. The computer business is now about 70 years mature. Okay, it started in the 50s with IBM with mainframes. Okay, up until about maybe 20 years ago, around the turn of the century. Security wasn't really that much of a factor. There are hundreds of billions of lines of code that were written without security in mind. And these are all published in public libraries, concept called object-oriented code. Give me these 10 things that's a command structure to perform a function. Those are open source. You can get them online. And they are not wrapped in security at all. And that's what happened in the printer scenario, was they just said, hey, here's code that's used in every printer, since the 70s, and we can exploit it. That's exactly what happened. So it's a scary frontier out there, and we need to be building and using tools and services like UAttest, identity access management, that help limit access to data and stuff. Garret, I know you're going to address that, but
we will. Ashley, why don't you move along? There you go.
Sure. So I have a two-part question for you, Peter. So although small companies may not be under SEC guidances, they still have to respond to these breaches and messaging and action. And then also, what are some of the actions that these small companies must take?
Sure. When I think SEC, I think public companies. Yeah. And those rules are laid out, and they are specific, and they are they're mandated, quite frankly, right? So I go to a bunch of different, and DV spoke about this. There are a lot of industries that have mandates in place. HIPAA, the healthcare industry, HIPAA is a perfect example. PCI industry with credit card payments and stuff, perfect example. These are industries that have very finite rules and very finite reporting structures. Excuse me. Otherwise, kind of in non-regulated industries, it's kind of fuzzy, and we're witnessing a big migration in the U.S. Security drives privacy. Okay, in the EU, privacy drives security. So we think security and then privacy. They think privacy and then security, and it's a totally different perspective. So you've heard about GDPR, which is the European standard for privacy, and right now the U.S., the National Institute of Science and Standards, has not come out with a finite framework. So to DV's point, we've got 50 states that are all coming out with their own, right? So you need to have if you're doing business in any given state, you need to be aware of the breach notification communications, and that's where a guy like DV comes in because he understands it. So immediate actions, Ashley. I've got a list. I got a whole arm's length list, but some of the fundamental things are, I call it lock the windows and doors, right? Literally, you should have systems in place, risk assessments, vulnerability assessments, passwords, that kind of stuff, right? one of the key things I think is if you are as a company watching this, if you're interested in cyber insurance at all, they will put some guardrails on it for you and tell you what you need to do and have these certain things in place in order to qualify to even be, able to get cyber insurance. So one of the things, if you have cyber insurance, that you should do is if you have a breach or if you suspect you have a breach, immediately contact them, because they've got teams of experts that are the adult supervision that are going to walk you through the response, if not do the response for you. From a more practical, disconnect from the internet, try to assess what's going on, maintain your firewalls, maintain your identity access management. Real quick, take a look, see what's been patched. If you've got down rev units that haven't been patched properly, that's huge. Lock up your passwords, make sure your passwords, and most specifically your admin passwords, are all reviewed so that there's not people that you don't know that have admin privileges. That's a big sign, right? Yeah. You got to try to do some forensics, figure out what happened, what are the symptoms, what's the data that's leaked, that kind of stuff. I talked about an incident response plan, trigger that immediately. You don't have to have a data breach to trigger an incident response. All you have to have is a symptom. Okay.
So may I enhance what Peter is saying a little bit? So think about it this way, right? A small business, a few things, right? Their customers, if they are businesses, small businesses are in trouble from that point of view, number one. Number two is ransomware, which is the most prevalent right now. If you pay a ransom, you are in trouble. If you don't pay a ransom, you're in trouble.
Right.
So you don't want OFAC, the financial guys, coming after you just because you paid a ransom, but the insurance guys are telling you to pay a ransom. Now you're stuck between rock and a hard place with respect to ransomware. Okay. So that's a big issue from a small business point of view, because there are certain people in the, voices, influencers in the industry. They're basically saying, let's put the no ransom payment law. I mean, there is some regulation associated with that also. They want to strictly enforce that. Right. Because the intention here is, if you're not, paying out millions of dollars in Bitcoin, by the way, you should have a small amount of Bitcoin in your pocket too, from this point of view.
That's a really good point. And I recommend that as well. Yeah. Is set up a Bitcoin account so that it doesn't take you 5 days to figure out how to do that, because that's 5 days your business may be down. Right. I'm not generally saying you should pay. I'm saying you should be able to pay. Big difference. Yeah. There were a couple other things. So once you've kind of identified with some forensics, figured out what's going on, then start to rebuild. And that's going to be patching and looking at your data and reassessing. Probably the most important thing of all, other than that incident response plan, is that you should always have a third set of data. It's called hierarchical storage management. It's been in practice since the 50s. IBM kicked it off really early. You have your systems that are running transactions and running data and changing all the time. You should have a local backup of those systems so that when the system goes down, you can pretty quickly recover. And then you ought to have a third copy that's what's called air-gapped. It's not connected to the network. It's in a third-party repository, whether it's, it could be on tape, it could be on CD, it could be in the cloud, it could be whatever. Actually, the cloud is still connected to your network. So it's a very, very good idea, especially small businesses. Go to the local computer store and buy a disk drive that you can plug into your network, download all of your data, unplug it. It's called an air gap. So when everything is ruined, you still have a pure copy of your data. That's probably that's one of the most, if not the most important thing for business continuity purposes.
I'll give you a story about that hierarchical, backups, right? know of an auditor who audited a couple of finance firms in the World Trade Centers pre 9/11.
Yeah.
And there are two firms that I am aware of at that particular point of time that actually there is a person walking in the office every week at the end of the week, taking a backup, complete backup. And his only thing is he'll take two backups. One goes to the CEO's office, one goes into some locker. And outside of that building, outside of the office, outside of any impact aspects of it, right?
Yep.
So you can actually, do a recovery very, very fast. Okay. You may lose a couple of days of data, a weekly backup, right? This is a weekly round robin type backup. So you may lose a couple of days of data, but you will have recovery.
The key with that is that it needs to be far away. That air gap needs to be, if a tornado blows through town and takes out every building, you don't want to have that in the building next door that got taken out as well. You want to have that in grandma's closet or something, right? That's 500 miles away that's not going to get hit by the tornado. Literally, it's true. I mean, and frankly, for everybody that's listening, you should be doing that with your personal information as well.
Yeah.
Do a backup, all your pictures,
Iron Mountain.
Everything.
Iron Mountain, right? That's what it is all about.
That's exactly what Iron Mountain is. I'm sorry, I got off track there. Actually.
No, that is on track. I mean, that's why there is things like SOC 2 Type 2, right, guys?
Right.
That make sure that those are in place, and you do business with something that has a SOC 2 Type 2 that proves that, which will be a whole nother panel someday, guys, saying why isn't there a standardized SOC 2 Type 2 for cyber insurance? That's a whole nother panel that I do want to rant.
There kind of is, Garrett, and you just opened up a can of worms there. SOC 2 Type 1 is, do you have the practices in place?
Right.
SOC 2 Type 2 is, show me.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I say. I believe that be it CMMC, SOC 2 Type 2s, whatever, it's got to be external auditing. And before we go on, Ashley, there is something, and I think, Peter, you will agree with this. Wouldn't you agree, Peter, that especially the small companies that don't have people on staff should have someone who is capable of helping jump in on a day's notice on a breach in a speed dial, right? Given where we're at now, that having a third-party risk manager, and we know a lot of small companies can't afford, they have someone on staff with cyber, but they have someone like you on speed dial said, this happened, and then you go, great, here's my checklist that we already went through.
Yep.
This is how we're going forward. And that's got to happen beforehand.
I have a client that has been breached, and it's just, what do I do, right? And you're right, there's a kind of a checklist right up front, and it's, again, what happened, how do you think it happened, what are the symptoms, and okay, here's some real quick things that you should kind of execute. That's part of an incident response. There's a bunch of companies, mine included, that will do a for a minor fee, put me on retainer and just say, Peter, I need you available, or ABC company.
No.
If and when this happens, I'm going to get you a call. Boom. You need to be on the hook 4:00 in the morning. And it's like, okay, I'll show up.
I'll second that because recently a partner of ours calls me and says, hey, here is a CEO, 500 people company. They're down 3 days. Is there something we can help with? I said, I won't even touch it with the longest pole, because the expectations are set. They're in firefighting mode. The fire has consumed 4 warehouses, and there's absolutely no other way to do anything but completely knock everything down and start from scratch.
And they're frantic in the process.
Yeah, yes. That's where it's a little late to choose the whatever. I mean,
it's too late.
So
enterprises and
Garrett,
maybe even cities like Dallas. I'm kidding, Peter.
I'm sorry, Garrett. There's I always kind of say it's, and this plays into the next segment here, but an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's really not that hard or expensive to put the guardrails in place to prevent this stuff. And the bigger the company you are and the more risk you have of being down, the more costly it's going to cost you. You need to be putting that risk assessment in financial risk assessment in place. Ounce of prevention, not that expensive to do. It's insurance is really what it's unofficial insurance is what it is, but it's just let's invest in these programs, let's invest in these services, and data loss prevention is a big one. Not talked about that much, but hey, man, if I got data moving around on my network and I don't know what it is, if I've got data leakage and I don't know where it's going, you've been hacked, right?
Yeah, it's like airbags are better than physical therapy. Right.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right. It's a good way to put it.
Take it away, Ashley.
So, Garret, I want to pivot back over to you. So, given that the hackers often start with identities and at least wind up attacking identities, so special care after a breach must be practiced on identities. Is that right?
Yeah, there is a Bible of hacks. Okay, not to Metasploit, not to whatever, but every year Verizon does a great report. It's called the DBIR. Peter knows it. DV knows it. Most people know it.
Everybody knows it.
The Data Breach Investigation Report. And I've been doing identity for 30 years. And every year, identity is the bigger reason of the cause behind a hack. Now it's up to like 70%. Okay? Because Peter, who specializes in SMB and commercial, would know a lot of these companies, there's no such thing as a network anymore. There is an identity store, there's applications, and then there's resources. Everything is identity based. So if we're not focused on what our identities control, we are opening ourselves up to these hacks. And that's where we go into after the hack. We have to make sure that we're doing these reviews. Take it away, Ashley.
DV, so isn't a lot of the mandated messaging around identities, and especially when the affected data is sensitive data like PHI for healthcare, PII for financial, CUI for defense contractors? What do you think?
That's absolute. I mean, it's on track. It's correct, right? A breach of personal information means specific identity of individuals, employees, customers. Maybe you have leads, vendors, and nearly all privacy laws are about unencrypted personal information, right? And the definition of identity is about more than 2-3 pieces of personal information. Say, if a breach has occurred and your name and email address alone, are out there, then that does not trigger a reporting consideration. So it needs to be more than 2 pieces of information, name, email, and say social security number. That triggers a reporting, that triggers some kind of notification being sent out. So you would consider then identity to be really important and encryption to be a really key consideration. And, so because there are encryption exceptions, because the intention here is if the keys are not known, they won't be able to decipher them. It's kind of useless for the guy who's exfiltrating the data. And if there is a data breach associated with encrypted information, typically it's useless for the people who actually got hold of that data, right? Obviously, depends on type of encryptions, how long does it take, et cetera, Things are getting, far easier for people to actually decrypt a, 32-bit key, right? So it all depends on how you start to think about identities within in your network. The other element that we have noticed a lot is specifically with AI, the data, personal data on anonymized personal information is getting replicated multiple times by researchers using that data often enough. So they keep it in their laptops, they keep it in secondary storage and all over the place. So the footprint of that data is just now increased dramatically with so many people actually using the data. So a lot of companies are actually trying to figure out how to anonymize that data before it is given to researcher. and obviously kind of have it more useful, even if it is anonymized, have it useful. Right?
As well as a lot of AI people are trying to figure out, okay, I have this anonymized data, now how do I get it specific? Right? So again, it all depends on the intent, right?
And there's a lot of synthetic data creators associated with that. So they can actually mirror your data and create synthetic data. So you could use synthetic data instead of the actual one. So there's a lot of tools that are coming about for you to do that. But I'm not sure how, I mean, the question then also comes up, right? How is it useful for a small business or a mid-sized business? How is it useful for a large business? The larger businesses are actually more careful, and they're becoming more and more careful with respect to guardrails, with what type of AI tools are used and where is the data stored, sovereignty of data being stored. It should be in my country. I mean, that triggers national security considerations. That's the whole TikTok face app equation, right? Russian face app taking all the data away and storing somewhere else. TikTok storing, I mean, obviously TikTok has probably changed a lot of their internal rules on where the data is stored and how researchers can access that particular personal information and behavioral information. So all of that comes into play there. Big topic, I'm sure.
Very big topic. And over the way, we'll never know.
Yeah.
We'll never know.
So, Garret, aren't overly permissive accounts one of the major sources of these breaches?
Yeah, and not me saying it, not TV, and not Peter saying it, but the FBI and the CISA came together with other organizations and created something called the JRTF, the Joint Ransomware Task Force. Great to be in Washington. Just keep on making up acronyms, but it's a good one, right? They created a guide, literally a guide that said, hey, we're being hacked, and this is bad. I mean, this is literally getting, as Peter says straight out, this is getting to be a national and international crisis of how much we're being hacked. Some really important hacks I just saw of late about our public infrastructure and our electrical and our power systems, okay? So the Joint Ransomware Task Force says straight out, one of the items is, let's get a hold of our identities. And Peter said it, and I liked it. The principle of least privilege. Okay, that's in Cybersecurity Framework 1.1, NIST PRC AC-6. Okay, says let's start checking those identities. Given that an identity is worth what? You can buy an identity off the internet at 25 cents if it's a regular user, or $1 or whatever. Okay, how much privilege did you give that user? Given that they can find that user, given that they can run something like Metasploit and get into your system, given that your identities are vulnerable, don't we got to lock down our identities? And that's what the Joint Ransomware Task Force Guide, Stop Ransomware Task Force Guide states. And I just put that into the LinkedIn chat and a little blog we wrote on that, okay? And it states you got to start locking down your identities. You got to know what the identities have. And what's relevant is this is both a pre-breach and a post-breach activity, okay? Right. Pre-breach on a regular basis, mandated by every regulation known to man. I mean, we can list them off: HIPAA, high trust, PCI DSS, et cetera, all mandate that you review your identities. But it's also a best practice after the breach to say, who has access? What did they have access? Why did they have access? The cyber kill chain, came up by Lockheed 30 years ago, and is pretty much the Bible of what hackers to follow the hackers. Step number 4 is privilege escalation. Once they get in our systems, they got an ID, they're going to move up, they're going to move around by elevating their privileges. Okay, after you get breached, wouldn't it make sense to say, well, we better check all our permissions, because our regular users might have admin privileges, which the hackers took advantage of. So yes, identities matter in the breach, Ashley.
So, Peter, hackers often practice privilege escalation and change their permission during an attack, right? To help
Yep.
them gain access to more systems?
Yep, absolutely. We talked a little bit earlier about bots and whatnot, and there's all kinds of ways for somebody to get into a network, right? Whether it's through a myriad of vulnerabilities, infinite number of vulnerabilities. What the process generally is go in and discover, get in and discover, hey, what can I get to right now? And oh, by the way, remember we talked about my strategy as being potentially nefarious. I want to do something. I'm going to exploit something, right? What can I do, and can I do it easily right now? There's a concept called dwell time. Dwell time is the time that is between when I have access to your network and when I am going to do something about it. So there are dwell time examples that are years. Somebody's been in this network for years, and we haven't known it.
That's really good.
We haven't known it. I mean, there's ways to become stealth, right? When we talk about access escalation, generally in a well-run shop, you're going to have an identity and access management profile for each kind of employee. And some employees, and Garrett, we spoke about this in another session. Some employees shouldn't have access to everything. You should only have access to what your job entails. A technical person shouldn't be able to get into the financials and change the financial statements, kind of stuff, right? So escalation is generally happening in that dwell time period where somebody's in. Now I've discovered what the network is, where I can get to. Now let's figure out, let me find a vulnerability and figure out if I can get admin rights into other areas. Then that would be considered escalation. So I want to say, okay, I want to be able to get into the financial statements. I want to be able to get into the ERP system. I want to be able to get into the marketing and sales system, right? I want to get into the CRM system, whatever it is. So the escalation would be then a new discovery. Where do I go? Where else can I get to? So that hacker is going to have a strategy on what they want to accomplish. That's why they're doing it. So once they figure out how to escalate, then that's going to get them closer to the ability to be able to execute what their strategy is. Do I want to get into the do I want to cause financial havoc? Do I want to suck out all the, name, rank, serial number of everybody, your social security numbers, your bank accounts, your, access codes, and it depends on what their strategy is. But escalation is a very, very standard part of any kind of a breach. Always going to happen. The dwell time could be, hey, we're in and let's shut the place down. Let's deliver a payload that's going to encrypt everything. Boom, happens right away. Or it could be as much as years. Again, it depends on what the intent is. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So, Garrett, is this where UATest can help in these access discoveries?
100%. 100%. Peter did a great job of saying, hey, the identities are a problem. The privilege escalation is a problem. Okay, what is our control? That's what always the risk people say is, there's these are controls. And there's great, like what DV said earlier, there's great frameworks out there. Really are. I don't care if you use the cybersecurity framework or the, our friends over at MITRE ATT&CK, etc. There's great frameworks, okay? All of them state that we have to be reviewing our identities, okay?
Yeah.
And what we've done at UATest, let's just say, talk about the little company, the little sign behind us, is that we've created an automated process for companies big and small. Actually, even charging companies that had 900,000 roles that we've grinded through the system. We also done 100 users or whatever. It's an automated process that utilizes what companies have. It came up in our previous Audit Tuesdays, whatever. Identities are under attack. IAMs are attacked. Well, not only are they under attack, they're also part of the solution. Okay? Because everyone has one now. That's why the hackers go at them, like banks. Everyone goes after the IAMs because everyone has one. But they're also part of the solution. We created a solution that plugs into your existing IAM. I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's Ping, Jump Cloud, Okta, Azure AD, plugs into there and lets you do an access review. And post-breach, as Peter would call it, is an access discovery. Okay? Who the hell do we have access to? Who has access now? That's what we've automated. And yes, you can run it yourself, or it's really well performed when in the hands of an expert as something like Peter and his company. Take it away, Ashley.
Let me jump in there for a second, Garret. I call it hygiene, right?
Nice.
Cybersecurity is all about people, process, and technology. And hygiene is a very, very good thing. Identity and access management is a great place to periodically, let's review, okay? And there's a bunch, there's actually 3 or 4 symptoms that pop out in an event management system or a SOC in reporting. One of them is going to be if you're reviewing your identity and access management profiles, if there's somebody that stands out, that's who the heck is this person? How did they get access, right? That's a red flag. That, right there, you should trigger your incident response plan right there and just say there's somebody in here that shouldn't have access to this stuff. So questionable access privileges is one. Another is there are a bunch of tools in place, network monitoring tools and stuff that monitor and manage measure the movement of data. So if there's any big chunk of several big chunks of data that's moving abnormally through your network, that means somebody might be in there doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. And that might be an internal employee that's doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. So that's another symptom. Changes to permissions are that should be flagged. That should be, anytime, you should be watching for changes of permissions. It's going to be an HR function. Somebody takes a new job, right? That should be authorized and planned. So large data, abnormal data movement, data moving around the net, big chunks of data moving out, any digital loss out the door, any big transactions that are going, over the internet to someplace else, the data movement side, and then certainly privilege access, any kind of changes in privilege. Those are all symptoms that there's somebody in the process of dwell time doing something. Those are all red flags. Any one of those should trigger an incident response and take a look at it.
So, DB, why don't you tell us a little about SRIO and what can be done to quantify the problem of creating post-breach messaging?
Well, at Assert, we actually provide the IT GRC compliance solutions. For example, as we were talking, we addressed the new SEC cyber rules with respect to how you go about doing 10K and 8K disclosures. But the more important thing is what's the process you need to have in place. We provide that automation, for example, to conduct materiality assessments and have ways to auto-generate these disclosures. So you have a consistent process and you can create your own process playbook associated with it. Like what Peter was saying, right? So if I have so many things happening, do I have a review process in place? Do I have a risk management framework in place? There's so many elements that you can actually standardize against. Obviously, SEC, for example, is looking at either a NIST kind of framework or an ISO type of framework. Many large enterprises have something in place. May not be specifically a NIST or an ISO, but they have their own probably internally created enterprise risk framework in place, right? So that's kind of what we do. We provide solutions associated with that, right?
DB, how can you be reached? I know the audience is going to want to get a hold of you.
Absolutely. I mean, you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm the only person with that last name, maybe something like that. Or my email address is dv@assert.io, and our website is assert.io as well. So you can reach me there. I also want to talk a little bit about the third-party supply chain issue. Do we have another minute or two?
We're coming pretty close to the time.
Okay, so I think for another day.
And we could do this again. I
love this.
We probably should do a whole topic on the supply chain, DV.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm game for that.
Yeah, good stuff. Take it away, Ashley.
And then, Peter, can you please explain what Gailey Solutions does and also tell the audience how they can reach you?
Sure. Gailey Solutions is a cybersecurity services firm. What we'll do is we go in and we'll do from a high level, we'll do a baseline assessment of somebody's cybersecurity posture and their programs. So we do a lot of assessments. We'll go and do an ITIS risk assessment, which generally looks at your people and your processes. We'll do an enhanced vulnerability assessment, which is inside discovery. You're discovering your network, all of your assets, hardware, software, network topologies, network mapping, rev levels, patching, all that, those kinds of reports. And then we'll do a pen test, which is outside looking in, which we'll literally do a white hat service. We'll break in, we'll tell you how we broke in, and we'll tell you what you need to do so somebody else can't break in behind us. So cybersecurity services, people, process, and technology. From those services, we put together a roadmap and a prioritized set of remediation plans that says, here are the things that are most important for you to do right now. And it's going to be a list of potentially 100 projects, 200 projects. Get to these with your hair on fire. Okay. And then, oh, by the way, get to these as you can manage them. The other component in there is we'll do data discovery. So it's people, process, technology, and data. Look at the data. We use UATest to say, okay, let's identify data. Let's identify where it is, what it is, who has access to it, and let's build a program around to reduce your risk. So cybersecurity services company, baselines, and then we do we'll look through a lens for certification purposes as well. So an industry lens. We have a lot of partnerships. We use a lot of leveraged relationships. That's Gailey Solutions.
And Garrett, can you sum up what we do at UATest for the audience?
Absolutely. UATest falls under the concept of IGA, Identity Governance and Administration. The concept is we have to, after the users are provisioned, with authorization, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, who has reviewed them? Who has certified that those accesses are still valid? Who has checked those? UATest has created an automated process that works for all companies, big and small, that recertifies users and permission, an ideal solution before and after a breach.
Perfect. And we can be reached at uatest.com or write us at info@uatest.com. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Great stuff.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Great stuff, Ashley.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
All the best.
Bye.